everyone. This is Jason Burack of Wall Street for Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street for Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a first-time guest. I followed his work for a bunch of years. Really enjoy his speeches on the Mises Institute YouTube channel. He currently writes as a contributing editor for Casey Research and is the author of 3 books: Early Speculative Bubbles and Increases in the Supply Money, The Failure of Common Knowledge, and Walk Away, The Rise and Fall of the Home Ownership Myth. He's a former president of the Ludwig von Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama, and he worked in the banking sector also for many years. Thank you for joining us, Doug French.
Well, thank you for having me, Jason.
Now, Doug, you got your graduate degree, I believe, under Murray Rothbard, but is that how you became a libertarian and learned about the Austrian School, or did you learn about it before then?
No, that was my first experience with the Austrian School and libertarianism when I enrolled at UNLV, and this would have been about 1988. I really, like a lot of people, I was in my late 20s, so I was fairly late to this, but I really didn't have any ideology one way or the other. I got interested in maybe pursuing a master's in economics. So I take a couple classes at UNLV, and then I'm looking at the course catalog, wondering where to go next, and I see this class, History of Economic Thought, instructor Rothbard, and I actually asked one of my classmates, and I was doing this in the evening, so I wasn't around campus a lot, but I asked one of my classmates who I'd had in other classes, I said, do you know anything about this Rothbard guy? And he said, oh, you don't want to take that class. He's a kook. Go ahead and take it with another instructor. They'll be able to figure something out for you, but he's a nut. You don't want to take him. Well, you know, if you're working during the day and just showing up on campus for classes, you don't want to have to spend a bunch of time lining up something special. So I went ahead and took Murray, and you know, the rest is history. I still remember the first night he walked in. There was a student following him carrying his stool because he lectured while sitting on a stool. But when he hit the door, he started talking immediately. It was during the first Gulf War, and he just went into lambasting politicians who were wanting to cap gas prices and, you know, monkey with the markets. And he just he didn't take roll. He didn't pass out a syllabus. He didn't do any of that. He just started. And it was a fascinating class, and I was intrigued from the first night. And it's not like he preached libertarianism necessarily or Austrianism, but over time it began to sink in, and I honestly didn't know how lucky I was. It was a couple years when I was at a conference in San Francisco, and some people saw on my name tag that I was from Vegas, and they said, "Oh, do you know Murray Rothbard?" I said, "Yeah, I took classes under him." And they all their mouths dropped open. They said, "Can we have notes? Can we, what was that like? Blah, blah, blah." And so it was kind of at that point it hit me how special my opportunity was.
That's pretty amazing. I've actually gone back because of the Mises Institute website, and I've gone back and been able to listen to some of Rothbard lectures, and some of his lectures on Keynes are actually pretty amazing, going back through all the character flaws of Keynes and some of the bad things that Keynes have done and how much of a hypocrite in a lot of aspects, Keynes was and things like that. It's really amazing how much of a mastery Rothbard had over the material. It definitely sounded to me, by the way he was giving the lectures, he didn't need any real notes to give. He just knew the material so well, front, back, side. He was just so passionate about it, whereas some professors, you learn in college, they're just not passionate about some of the material that they teach.
Well, he did have notes in front of him, but these are notes he had written. And if any of your listeners want to know what or read the written version of those lectures, just by History of Economic Thought, the Austrian, from an Austrian point of view, you can purchase it at the Mises website, and those are straight out of the lectures that he gave. And so but it's like the stream of consciousness, and it's not like any sort of economics that you're going to read anywhere. This is about good guys and bad guys, and you follow the money. And Murray was, he was telling a story. This wasn't equations and graphs and those kind of things. I mean, it was just a fascinating story, and he'd stop and he'd laugh and cackle, and he was. I mean, it was like a stream of consciousness just coming out of him, and so some people have criticized his lecture style for not being terribly, systematic, so to speak. But and he'd stop and give normally about a dozen reading references during the course of any class. So when I look back over my notes, I have all these authors, and he'd give the author of a book, the publisher, what year it was published. He just had an incredible recall for books he had read and places you could find information. And when I went to him to write my thesis under him, he was, number one, incredibly enthusiastic, and number two, he must have given me 12 or 15 sources the first day I sat with him to get me started on my thesis.
Yeah, very, very good. I read What Has Government Done to Our Money a number of months ago. That was the first Rothbard book I'd read. Like I said, I learned Austrian School Economics by listening to Mises Institute lectures from yourself and others, and also reading Economics in One Lesson, starting with the beginner's books besides just the lectures on the Mises YouTube channel. But what I noticed from What Has Government Done to Our Money, it was just such a well-written book. It could have been written yesterday. There was so many pertinent things in there. It's as if the book had almost been written yesterday, with a lot of the things when he wrote the book, they're playing out now again.
Well, these things never change. And central banks really only have one weapon, and that is to create more money, and that's what they always do. It's interesting that you say that. I teach a money and banking course at Troy University this semester, and urged my students. In fact, I gave them a copy of The Case Against the Fed, but one of my students read that very book that you were just talking about, What Has Government Done to Our Money? And he asked me before class, he said, Rothbard is so clear. You know exactly what the problem is. And he said, why doesn't everybody realize it? And I think that's the impression anyone gets when they read Rothbard. He makes it so clear, it's so simple, and yet the same thing happens over and over and over again. So the book's going to be timeless. It was timeless when he wrote it. It still very, very much resonates today.
Yeah, I completely agree. But the thing that you mentioned, the point that you mentioned is why haven't people, when they read Rothbard, noticed it? The answer is that most people haven't read Rothbard. The Austrian School Economics should be core curriculum in any business school class for people who want to understand what's really happening in the economy, not Keynesian gobbledygook and econometrics and some of these other useless courses that a lot of business school people are taught. It's basically, I think you've worked in academia too. It seems as if I was an MBA student and I did drop out. It almost seems as if like they're intentionally trying to brainwash people. So when the government screws things up and they create another bust after a big boom, that there's the justification in place to just start printing more money. That we didn't see any of this coming. No one could have seen any of this coming, and that we have to print more money or things are going to get really bad for everyone.
Yeah, that's it's not a surprise, or shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, that the biggest employer as a PhD economist is the Federal Reserve. So they have all these Feds, all these PhDs sitting at the Fed, and I have no idea what they're doing other than making mischief, creating problems, and then problems that they contend that it's only them that can fix it. And of course, the market would fix this. The market would cleanse these malinvestments that are created by this incredible creation of money that leads money into the wrong investments, but they don't let the market do it. They continue to try to keep us from having that next Great Depression, and because they don't keep us from having that next Great Depression, we're stuck in this malaise that we've been in for the last 6 or 7 years. And, who knows? We're probably the next Japan, if you will, is that we're just going to coast along at this, bumping along the bottom with zero interest rates and high unemployment that they don't recognize, and more inflation than they will recognize. And it's going to have tragic effects on retirees and young people alike.
Yeah, I completely agree, Doug. Japan is a best-case scenario for the U.S. going forward, and Japan can't even be Japan that much longer anymore. Japan is running into a wall here too. I mean, their currency has been falling like a rock. Their import prices for food and energy and things like that are going through the roof. They're getting that stagflation now. So I think we're approaching the end of the Keynesian experiment here, at least for Japan. I don't know how much longer the U.S. or Europe or other countries can run this, but Japan seems to have been doing this longer than everyone else, where, Japan had this boom, the U.S. has had booms, and instead of allowing the cure, which is the Austrian school cure, which is the free market to work itself out, right, Austrian business cycle theory, they don't allow the cure to happen. So they just keep lowering interest rates and coming up with new programs, whether it's quantitative easing or currency swaps or whatever the next program is, to figure out to, put more money into the system because they don't want to allow pain. Or why do you think they won't allow any pain to occur in the economy?
Well, they don't want pain to occur because essentially politicians want to get reelected. And so they're very short-term oriented. As Hans Hoppe has written, politics in a democracy is driven by high time preference. The high time preference is to make hay as fast and quickly as you can, rather than if it was, say, a monarchy that was family. If you had a family government that was there for generations, you would think more in the long term. In a democracy, politicians think only in the short term. This idea that we have central bank independence, whether it be the Federal Reserve or the Bank of Japan or now the European Central Bank, is completely foolish. In fact, Alan Greenspan recently at a conference in New Orleans said the idea of Fed independence is naive, is the way he put it. And I've done a lot of work recently on the relationship between Richard Nixon and Arthur Burns, who was his Fed chairman. And believe me, Burns was on a direct, he was on speed dial with Richard Nixon. Nixon would call him, and, he was constantly going over there, and Nixon was telling him what to do. And of course, he hit the gas, the monetary gas, trying to get Nixon reelected. And it hasn't been any different with whether it's been Bernanke or whether it's been Greenspan or any of these guys. What people don't realize is they may have ostensibly this idea that they're supposed to, A, protect the currency, and B, create jobs. But their main job is to keep the banking industry erect. They're there to keep the banks in business, and that's what they do rather effectively, is bail out banks when we get these periodic crashes, which we're going to have. We had one in 2008. We're going to have one again, another one probably sooner than later, and the Fed will be there to paper over it. That's their main job. That's what they're going to continue to do, and of course, the average person is going to be the worse off for it. Value of the dollar is going to be the worse off for it. And, Rothbard and Mises and Hayek, they are not on any of these guys' reading list. If they are, it's not something they're going to, put into practice. And, but everyone should be as educated as they can on this so that they're not surprised, so that they can navigate their life, because unfortunately we're probably not going to change the world, but we have to learn to live within this crazy monetary situation that they've created.
I completely agree. Well, we can change the world one person at a time, and hopefully that one person teaches another person, things like that. But yeah, I agree. We can't save you and me doing our podcasts or writing our content and articles. We can't save everyone. It's just not going to work. And there's people, who make money off the system who don't want to believe anything. There's people, the incentive system in the current economy is so screwed up at this point where politicians or lobbyists or things like that, or people in the mainstream financial media make so much money off the status quo that they don't want to listen to people like you and me. If Ron Paul or Peter Schiff gets 5 minutes without being called morons or insane or things like that on CNBC or Bloomberg, it's a minor miracle.
Well, and we can see that with what Draghi came out just in the last 24 hours when he said their European Central Bank is now going to take the next step to try to start buying up assets. And the European markets took off. The U.S. markets took off. They know more money is going to be created. And people make money off that. And why the Occupy Wall Street people and other people on the left don't see this, and why they don't embrace this anti-Federal Reserve or anti-central bank movement, I don't understand, because it should be very clear to them that as money is created, like Murray told us in class, as money is created, the people first in line, the banks, the politicians, they come out ahead, and at the expense of those at the tail end, which is retirees, people on fixed income, people with lower skills and experience. So you're exactly right. There are people who definitely benefit by the current system, and that's probably why it's not going to go anywhere. But to put a little bit of hope in this, there are probably more Austrians, probably more interest in Austrian economics than ever before because of Ron Paul, because of the Mises Institute. There's 17, 18 Mises Institutes around the world now. So young people like the truth. Once people get over a certain age, they think they know everything, so you can't change those minds. But young people are searching for answers. They know there's a better way. And it may be a generation or so, or maybe we have a complete currency collapse before then. But that's the key, is to have the right people in the right places when those things happen, to try to put things on a proper path.
Yeah, I agree. My generation is starting to wake up, Doug, out of necessity. I mean, we're graduating college with enormous student loan debt. There's not a lot of high-paying full-time jobs available. The government and the mainstream financial media on Wall Street are trying to say how great the economy is doing, but the economy, I live right outside of Washington, D.C., which has one of the lowest unemployment rates, and there's really not a lot of full-time jobs available here. They're mostly through the government. Those are the highest-paying ones in the area for the most part, but there's a lot of people I know who have 2 or 3 paper degrees, but then they can only get 2 or 3 part-time jobs. So and the unemployment's low, and then in the unemployment statistics are counting I think part-time jobs now as full-time jobs. So there's just so much gimmickry and stuff. But out of necessity, though, people are starting to question the official narrative of the story. How no matter how much money is printed or bailouts or things like that, the hopium that is sold to the people are like, hey, wait a second, if the economy is really going so well, why is there not a couple different full-time jobs that I can easily get when I'm competing with 50 or 100 different people for one job?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And we've created the Fed has created all this money. It's quadrupled its balance sheet, and certainly high-powered money has been increased. Overall money supply hasn't increased as much because banks aren't necessarily lending. But when you look at the number of jobs has increased, but when you look at labor hours, they're about the same as they were before the crash. So all this money, all this intervention, and we're only back to same amount of jobs really as we were beforehand. So the economy's essentially gone nowhere. Yet it's fascinating. We have all these big mergers now. Because of the low interest rates, companies are going to get bigger. So again, we see Wall Street getting bigger, more powerful, government getting bigger, more powerful, and at the expense of all of us. Bigger firms doesn't mean that doesn't lead to prosperity necessarily. It just leads to inefficiency. 70 to 90% of mergers fail, yet Wall Street celebrates when we get merger mania because of these low interest rates.
Oh yeah, Wall Street makes a ton of money off fees for the mergers and acquisitions. They get to arbitrage the deal with the cheap money. They make extra profits each quarter off this. So that's why they like it. They don't care what happens 5 years or 10 years from now. They don't, as you know, Henry Hazlitt wrote in Economics in One Lesson. You know, you have to look for the unintended consequences and the long-term effects of economic policy behavior. They only care about the short-term stuff and how it affects them, what they can do with this cheap money. It's just very interesting now how short-sighted everything has gotten, you know, whether it's our civil liberties being taken away, you know, for supposed security, or the economy here with bailouts and money printing and things like that. And then we look and we see that the banks, you know, they're even more leveraged in some cases, especially outside the United States, than they were before the crisis. And now the banks, like, they've all merged to the point where they're even larger than they were before the crisis, and they're not able to stand on their own 2 feet still.
Well, absolutely. You've had more aggregation of financial assets since the crash than ever. You've got fewer than 7,000 banks in the United States now. Most people don't keep track of that number. I do, because I used to be in the banking business, but you know, coming out of the S&L crisis, there were 15,000 banks in the United States. Now we're down to less than 7, and I would say we're probably going to cut that number in half. The more regulations that get ladled on, and probably it's also a symptom of these low interest rates that people, small bankers, will probably just get out of the business. They can't make a loan to make any money. And just get bought out by bigger and bigger firms. And you're right about the firms, banking firms in Europe, incredibly highly leveraged. The banks in the United States are much more leveraged than what they look like on our financial statements, because the derivatives exposure isn't necessarily counted. And so, and the amount of derivatives has exploded. You know, we go back to the real estate crisis, and everyone was bellying up to the bar of making real estate loans, and it all went south. Well, believe me, the next big problem for big banks, small banks, a lot of them, but more so for big banks, is this incredible derivatives exposure that's in the you know, $700 trillion range. It's a number that is unimaginable, uncountable. And when it falls apart due to counterparty risk, it will create an incredible scramble for real assets that are out there right now.
Yeah, behind the scenes, Doug, we're already starting to see that scramble for real assets. You look at the price of real estate; it's gone up a lot since 2008. The price of artwork, the price of rare collectibles and diamonds and things like that has gone up a lot. Gold and silver prices have come down. They're really the only hard asset that has dropped. That, you know, the rich, the really high net worth store their stuff in, like fine artwork and antiques and those things. The prices on those have spiked a lot. So it's pretty amazing that we've seen things like this and how long. I'm at least surprised. You know, I was not a financial expert in 2007, 2008. I was just a stockbroker learning about the markets and working at at a larger firm. And then everything blew up and the shit hit the fan. And just to see like how long they've been able to keep this game going for so long, it's just really amazing. Do you think are you surprised how long they've been able to keep things going by money printing?
No, I'm not. And the reason is, and I tell people this, part of the thesis I did under Murray was early speculative bubbles that you mentioned in the intro. And it was about 3 episodes. It was about Tulip Mania, it was about the Mississippi bubble, and it was about the South Sea bubble. Well, the 2 episodes that relate to this are the Mississippi bubble and the South Sea bubble. And in the case of the Mississippi bubble, John Law in France had the Banque Générale, where he was creating incredible amounts of fiat currency, trying to drive up the price of Mississippi Company shares. Which is really a company with no assets other than trading rights to the New World. He would take the money that went into that company and refinance the government's debt. It wasn't altogether different than what was going on, than what's going on today. But the point is that people didn't really have a choice. They wanted to go into silver and gold, and then he put a bunch of edicts into place where demonetizing silver and gold. But people desperately wanted to get out of the shares, Mississippi Company shares, and get out of the currency, but they couldn't. So they were given a choice between the two, and it really elongated that particular period. In the South Sea bubble, the same thing didn't happen, and that was a quick rise in those shares, and people could get out get out of those shares and into the currency. So it went away very quickly. I think we have the same sort of situation now. What do you get into? Do you get out of overinflated government bonds and into an overinflated U.S. dollar or stocks or what? And so we've got so many multiple bubbles going on is that they can essentially keep this thing propped up for a lot longer than especially guys like you and I who've read into the Austrian school and kind of know what's happening, know what's going to happen. But Austrians tend to be early, and it's probably going to go on longer than you and I could possibly believe it will.
Yeah, and it's not just the Federal Reserve printing. It's the Bank of Japan with the yen carry trade, and China has actually, I think, China and Japan have printed more than anyone else the last 3 or 4 years. They've just been flooding the world with drastically amounts of new currency, and they've allowed their banks to give out enormous, at least in China, they've allowed enormous loans to be given out and things like that. So those are all causing asset bubbles all over the globe, whether it's, London property markets or in Canada. I was just up in Toronto in September. There's construction cranes nonstop in Toronto now and all over Vancouver and things like that. Great point you brought up about the financial history there with what the politicians do to suspend gold and silver or make it difficult or disincentivize people buying it. I read about the French hyperinflation in 1790. I think under penalty of death, no one was allowed to transact in gold or silver either. But then the farmers who were selling the food, they didn't trust the paper money that was being printed too. And they decided, you know what, well, I'm going to die anyway if I hold paper money, right? I'm going to die anyway because I'm not going to be able to afford food or buy anything for my family to survive. So they started accepting gold or silver for their food in under penalty of death anyway. So, we're not to that point, I guess, where the whole crowd psychology is ready to just give up on things. I think people still believe in the narrative, or at least they want to. Most of the people still want to believe. But I think we are on that path where we're going to get to 2008 or worse at some point because everyone, whether it's the United States or Japan or China, is all trying to do the same stupid Keynesian policy, right? Well,
absolutely, and people should remember that a government that's backed into the corner financially will get very, very mean. And if you can't imagine, already you have to declare if you're going to Canada or you're going somewhere, are you carrying $10,000 worth of financial instruments? It's really kind of a soft thing now. It's not real heavy, but let me tell you, if there's a flight from the U.S. dollar, if there's a flight from assets in the United States, and people want to try to make a run for it, they will get very, very mean on, A, keeping you here physically and keeping your financial assets here. So young people especially ought to think about maybe do you want to have your getaway place isn't in the middle of nowhere here in the United States. Maybe it's in another country. Maybe have some assets somewhere else because the United States is more indebted than any country in the history of the world. And when the problems really manifest themselves, the U.S. government will get very, very mean about keeping your assets and you here because that's how the state survives. The state isn't producing anything. It's only taking from its citizens.
Yeah, I completely agree. They see us as milk cows, like Doug Casey says, that they can keep milking and milking, and most people won't even complain or even notice that they're getting taxed, a little 1% more in 10 different ways. I was just eating lunch at a restaurant today, and there was a 10% tax on our bill. So, it just creeped up there. They just snuck it in there. They've just been raising the taxes. I paid for a plane ticket up to Toronto, like I said, in September, and there was an extra 40% tax levied on my airfare. And And, I don't hear anyone complaining about this. No one seems to, most people don't even seem to care about this anymore, but this is, why the people who originally immigrated here to the United States, they fought over taxes and government without representation and things like that. Going forward, Doug, what's your opinion about Bitcoin then? Do you think it's a viable alternative? You think it's a good innovation for libertarians and for people then to start diversifying besides gold and silver out of these potential capital controls and government rules changes?
I think people need to think about Bitcoin, and the way I look at Bitcoin is I always compare it to the Kindle, my Kindle, which I'm carrying, say 300 books around in my Kindle. And so as much as I like gold and silver, it's hard. Gold and silver are hard to carry around. And so it's hard to imagine me, if the dollar does crash and it goes away, that I'm going to pull out my Krugerrands or my Gold Eagles or whatever and stand in the middle of the street and tell all my neighbors that I was right. I don't think that's...
I hope you have guns and ammo then.
Yeah, I think some people have that fantasy, but I don't think it's going to be golden. As much as I think those are good assets to hold on to, I don't think those are going to be necessarily the trading assets that the modern world is going to want to see. And the thing about Bitcoin and the numerous other cyber currencies that have been created, these are truly market-created currencies. And there's probably never been a gold standard in history that wasn't administered by government. And in fact, gold standard by nature is a currency is backed by a precious metal per government edict. So that makes it a government program. And that is not the case with Bitcoin or Litecoin or any of the other kind of coins. And these are creations of the free market. And so if you're a fan of the free market, if you believe in the free market, I think that cyber currencies are something that if you're not going to embrace them in a big way, I still think you have to be rooting for them. And I am, I'm certainly intrigued by them. I'm not necessarily a big investor, but there's places that have paid me in Bitcoin, and I hold on to them. And the other thing I like to point out is the government certainly has a horse in this race now that they've stolen all those Bitcoin from the Silk Road people. So I would think, as much as some people think that Bitcoin is going to be regulated out of existence, I think that eventually technology will always stay one step ahead of the government.
That's a good point. And the Chinese government tried to completely ban Bitcoin from all its citizens, and it hasn't worked. The Bitcoin usage in China has exploded regardless of it. So, and China's government is just as authoritarian, if not more, in a lot of instances, especially for civil liberties, than the U.S. is, because, they have Facebook blocked. I think they have YouTube blocked and so many other websites blocked and other things. And I think they pay people to actually monitor social media sites and things like that, to make sure that certain things aren't posted. So, I just think it's amazing that Bitcoin has already accomplished a lot in only a couple years. I would prefer competing currencies and governments to not have a monopoly on money because, as good as the gold standard was in the past, there were still ways for governments to cheat on it, right?
Oh, absolutely, and they did cheat on it, and they made it go away when they wanted to. Whenever the government went to war, they didn't want the shackles of gold, so they just went off the gold standard, and most of the time they didn't go back on. Occasionally they would, but again, it's gold standard is as good as it is essentially a government currency. And again, I'm going to root for a free market currency. So people want to trade; they're going to trade in the best way they know how. And so I think cyber currencies, because of the fact that they're a payment system and a currency all in one. You don't necessarily have a third party. I think there's just extraordinary uses for this, and I think it's a fascinating story, and I don't think the majority of people realize how extraordinary it is to be on Earth and be able to watch the birth of a currency right before their eyes and watch and see how it takes place. Most people think governments snapped their fingers and created the dollar or the euro or whatever the case may be. And if they read some Carl Menger, Principles of Economics, they'll understand that money in all its forms has been an entrepreneurial process. When goods went from being bartered to being a currency, there were certain, as he put it, economizing individuals who were savvier in the marketplace and knew what goods were more marketable, what had more marketability. And we're able to see a currency being born, or various currencies being born, and I think it's an extraordinary thing to watch as somebody who's interested in economics.
Yeah, me too. And I would also like to see competing in the marketplace, but I don't think governments will allow this. Either digital receipts, so maybe a digital currency similar to Bitcoin based on that type of technology. And then, it's a receipt and it's backed up by physical gold or physical silver. But, we've seen other people try to do that in the past, and the governments have shut it down for whatever reasons. But maybe this time, now that Bitcoin has opened the door to a success like that, maybe we will see someone come up with some type of idea where it's a debit card or a digital currency, and then it's basically, just a receipt for the gold or the silver. I would love to see that too also compete in the marketplace and see if it would win out.
Well, I think Bitcoin and the other currencies have already had an impact. They're already on the radar screen. European Central Bank's done a big report on it. It's on the radar screen of the bank regulators. Just the ease of the payment system, and so I think they've already had an effect in probably making our lives easier, and it'll just be more so going forward. But again, the government's going to, they're going to try to fight it. They're going to try to tax it. My guess is they're probably going to try to tax it. They'd rather make money off something than have something go away. So.
Yeah, exactly. And the government just it wants to get its hands on everything. It would love to, if you listen to the Democrats here in D.C., which I've heard them talk about, they want to layer the taxes onto everything, put 1 or 2% taxes on everything if they could, whether that's, an e-commerce sales tax or a VAT tax or other things. They would just love to be able to get away with that, where they put 1 or 2% taxes on every single thing people buy or sell so they could get it on, additional tax revenues.
Yeah, that's how they exist. But yeah, I think it's fascinating that in our world, kind of the Austrian economics world, where people want to argue about whether Bitcoin conforms to Mises regression theorem and all this kind of jazz, and they want to fight about. And Kevin Dowd, who's more in the free banking camp, wrote a piece just this week or last week that Bitcoin can't survive because the economies of scale of mining Bitcoin, or eventually you're going to end up with one, and you'll end up at the same place that a central bank is. And so it's fascinating. You got a lot of people who are weighing in on this subject, but that's what competition is about. That's what the competition of ideas is about, and at least it's not the government dictating that, hey, you got to trade your toil and talent for this piece of paper with pictures on it. At least we have people in the arena of ideas talking about whether something's viable, rather than having it shoved down our throat by the government.
Exactly, Doug. And that piece of paper with pictures on it, right? They're just printing more of them, and they're letting hedge funds and investment banks and large banks just borrow more of that, unlimited amounts really, as much as they want, almost near zero. Whereas people, you and me on Main Street, small businessmen who might have a viable business idea and want to grow our business, we have to risk our house. We have to put all kinds of personal, you are in banking, so you know this. The guarantees now to get a small business loan are ridiculous now compared to how easy it is for a hedge fund manager with a lot of assets under management to do a highly leveraged yen carry trade or things like this and borrow hundreds of millions or billions of dollars.
Well, it makes sense if you're a big bank. Who you can lend to a hedge fund with collateral that the government considers risk-free, so you can provide more leverage, or in other words, have less reserves against that loan. Whereas if you lend to the guy down the street who's a dry cleaner on his business, you're going to have to maintain huge reserves now because of Dodd-Frank and Basel III. And so they've tilted the playing field very much in favor of lending to the big guys for this carry trade business that they think will just go on forever and ever and ever. But things don't go on forever and ever. And but yeah, your point is that Main Street's being left out at the expense of Wall Street, and that is absolutely right. And it shows in the numbers, in the money velocity numbers, where the Fed has quadrupled, yet money supply hasn't grown because the velocity's down. You just don't have money trickling down the Main Street through the commercial banking system.
Exactly, Doug, and that proves that everything the Keynesians are doing is failing, because if the Keynesian framework, if the economy was really recovering, as the mainstream media and Wall Street and Washington and the statisticians in Washington, D.C. and the politicians claim, then the velocity money would be increasing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Under the Keynesian framework, that there was a recovery, and the velocity falling off a cliff proves it's not recovering.
Well, I'll tell you, Keynes was really onto something, because he created something that doesn't work over and over and over again, but it's created a lot of jobs for Keynesian economists who can continually fail and fail and fail, yet win Nobel Prizes and earn big salaries and big speaking fees. So whereas I don't think you're seeing any Austrians out there getting $200,000 a speech or whatever Bernanke's earning these days. Certainly Murray Rothbard never did. Ludwig von Mises couldn't even get a teaching job. Murray was teaching at University of Nevada at Las Vegas, for crying out loud. So that kind of shows you where the world is. The truth is often hidden, and while the Keynesians get to inflict their pain on us, and it's certainly not fair. But as I said before, we all have to learn to live with it and try to navigate our way through these dangerous waters.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Janet Yellen's worth $13 million before she became Fed chairwoman. So she's about to drastically increase her net worth there, even when she's done. Even if the economy blows up, right, she probably won't get as much blame from the mainstream as she would deserve when the whole thing does blow up. And I'm sure she'll be getting the large speaking fees that Bernanke and Greenspan and those other ones are getting too.
Well, no.
So it's just
No question. In fact, she was called by some people the most qualified person ever for the Federal Reserve chairman's job. And it's kind of what Milton Friedman, of all people, said about Arthur Burns back in the Nixon days. Milton Friedman said that Arthur Burns was the most qualified person who had ever ascended to the Fed chairmanship. And now we have somebody like Yellen, who's never made a payroll, never run a business, probably never poured a soda or waited on a table even, spent her entire life in government and academia, and somehow she's the most qualified person to dictate a money supply that is 1/2 of every transaction done in the world or in this country. I mean, it's extraordinary that these kind of people can ascend to these kind of positions, but that's what we're left with.
Exactly. Extraordinary hubris, but I mean, the Keynesians have so much power and influence. The politicians want to believe them. They like the system. Wall Street and D.C. make so much money off the status quo that it's going to be very difficult to change the status quo without educating people about what's really going on. And I think that's what you've done a great job with over at the Mises Institute. The Mises Institute grew a lot under you, and you set up the YouTube channel, I think, while you were there. And, people like me are going to share the content and hopefully pass the torch and keep educating people. Well,
I think there is a groundswell of interest in the Austrian school, and, I'm surprised every day at, what's popped up literally around the globe with interest in this in these ideas. And these aren't new ideas. They're very, very old ideas, but we just need to get back to them And sometimes you want to give up because it feels like you're saying the same thing over and over again, and it's so simple you just want to shut up. But unfortunately, we can't do that. And thankfully, guys like you have created a podcast to reach out to people, and we just need to keep doing it and keep saying the same things over and over and again. And eventually, we'll make the world a better place.
Great. Now, Doug, I want to wrap up the interview here. I want to thank you again for your time, and hopefully we can have you on again in every couple months to talk about the economy from an Austrian School perspective. Where's the best place our listeners can find your work?
Well, I'm writing every Friday for KC Research, so that is kcresearch.com, and that's primarily where my work is these days. I'm also I'm a board member at Mises Canada. That's Mises.ca, so you can see my work there. And I pop up on Fee occasionally and other places, but the primary place is right now is kcresearch.com. So look for me there.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again for your time, Doug. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason.